On today's show, we take a look at the three prospects coming out of Duke this year in the NBA draft. We've got Paolo Banchero, of course, AJ Griffin, and Mark Williams. What is their potential fit with the Houston Rockets? What's their best attributes? What's their potential red flags coming out of the NBA draft? All of that and more coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
With the second pick in the 2021 NBA Draft, the Houston Rockets select Jalen Green.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
I'm going to keep working. I'm going to keep getting better every day. I'm going to keep perfecting my craft. And every time I step on that floor, I'm coming.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian, also host of Locked On NBA Mondays, host of the State of the Rockets podcast, as well as the founder of ClutchCityControlRoom.com. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin, the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets. As always, appreciate you for making Locked On Rockets your first listen each and every day, free and available on all platforms, as well as check us out on YouTube. Joining us now is our expert on all Duke men's basketball, JJ Jackson from the Locked On Blue Devils podcast, covering all of your Duke athletics needs 5 days a week. JJ, as per usual, Duke is coming out with some heat in this year's NBA draft. It seems like every year they've got a top prospect or two walking through the doors, going to the NBA level, and this year is no different with AJ Griffin, Paolo Banchero, and Mark Williams all being a part of this year's NBA draft.
No kidding, Jackson. You're right. Thanks for letting me be on the program with you today. And I did a full show last week just on the NBA draft history of Coach K, who's leaving and retiring and that sort of thing, because you're right. This school has had so many draft picks over the years, and it's an awesome position to be in. If you're a Duke fan, and I'll let Kentucky be in the equation as well, you've always got a reason after the college basketball season ends to turn on the NBA playoffs, or even throughout the regular season to check in, because you've got players on NBA teams that went to your school and that you could cheer for. And yeah, there are 3, 4, 5 more guys that have the opportunity to be drafted this year, really expecting 3 in the lottery for Duke. So let's get after it, man. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, we're going to focus on the 3 names, that are floating towards the top of a lot of people's mock drafts, lottery predictions, all of that. And where we're going to start is we're going to focus on AJ Griffin here first, because to me, JJ, he seems like such a dynamic, interesting player. And I know that this has been widely regarded as like a top 4 draft, Paolo Banchero being one of those top 4 guys. Now you've got the addition of Shaedon Sharpe fully confirming that he's going to be eligible and declaring for this year's draft. So maybe, depending on who you talk to, you call it a top 5 draft now. But I've consistently looked at AJ Griffin as that guy who's very much like at the top of the pecking order for me, as that guy to take a look at with that pick 5, pick 6. And that's where the Rockets could potentially find themselves, no worse than pick number 5 in this year's NBA draft. And to me, there's a bunch of names that you find, around that spot. You got Keegan Murray, you got AJ Griffin, Benedict Mathurin. But when you look at AJ Griffin and just his combination of size, speed, the shooting ability is what really stands out. He strikes me as almost that perfect, like, complementary plug and play role player, but not just a role player, because there's so many dynamic things that he can do offensively. He's not afraid to put the ball on the floor. He's not afraid to go get himself a shot.
Yeah, just my pulse of the Rockets and talking with you before we started recording, it does feel like, as you're saying, the ground level of a rebuild. And so when you look at the Rockets teams of the past, so with the James Harden era and the number of three-pointers that team was putting up, if you like three-point shooting, then AJ Griffin is for sure the player that you're going to like coming out of Duke at 6'6". Shot over 50% from 3 for the longest portion of the season, and it wasn't until the NCAA tournament did he fall below that 50% line. That's crazy, and it's not just 1 or 2 attempts a game. It's a large volume of three-point shots coming from AJ Griffin. Shooting alone is the reason that he's found himself in this position. I think the fact that he was able to play a full season of basketball for Duke, his junior and senior year, AJ Griffin barely played high school ball because he had knee injuries and he was just kind of preserving himself for that next stage of his basketball career. And it paid off because he was able to stay healthy for the entire season playing for Duke. The body held up well for AJ. And now coming into the mix as the top 3-point shooter that Duke has seen in recent memory out of the one and done era. I mean, he's definitely going to make an NBA team very, very happy with the way he could shoot the ball.
Arguably the top small forward prospect here in the draft, near the top end of the draft lottery. I'm curious though, JJ, when you look at what you've seen out of AJ Griffin, is there any potential thought to, in your mind that if he wasn't necessarily playing behind, right, a Paolo Banchero in the pecking order, in the hierarchy for Duke, for Duke basketball, that he could have been the go-to guy for a team, that he could have been the number one option? Because that's where I find myself very intrigued by him, because he's got all the skills to be that perfect plug and play role player. But I also think there's a bit of that like alpha mentality to him, at least when I've watched him play.
There is absolutely an alpha mentality to him. It's a rather quiet one compared to some of his teammates. People need to remember that his dad, Adrian, is currently an assistant coach for the Toronto Raptors. His brother, Alan, played at Syracuse and is playing professionally as well. So he comes from a basketball family. He knows what it takes to be a productive basketball player. And the idea that at Duke, you weren't able to see everything from AJ Griffin, I think it's entirely fair to say, because of the fact that you had Paolo Banchero, and then not to mention the guards that Duke had, and Jeremy Roach, who's coming back for his third season, but draft guys, and Wendell Moore Jr., and now Trevor Keels is going into the draft process as well. Those guys had the ball in their hands more frequently. They were trying to get Duke into offensive sets, driving and kicking out to AJ, and AJ made you pay because he knocked down the three ball from the outside. The fact that we didn't see AJ Griffin put the ball on the floor is kind of the holdup, I think, when you evaluate him as a prospect, because you just don't know. But I could tell you, with the talent he has, with the background that he has, I have full confidence that, yeah, if you want him to put the ball on the deck and create some offense that way, he's going to be able to do it. That's just the one thing we didn't see a whole lot of out of Duke. And you're exactly right. It's because Paolo had the basketball and so many other talented players.
What is maybe the biggest red flag at this point for AJ Griffin as he's coming out, for the draft this season, the area of his game that, you look at and you think, okay, this could be the holdup. Maybe this is the reason that he drops a few spots, or this might be the thing that causes him some speed bumps early in his NBA career.
I think it's two of the things that I just mentioned there. Maybe the injury history. Like I said, the fact that this was the first year in 3 years that he was able to play a full season of basketball, did miss a good bit of time in his junior and senior seasons of high school. And then also the fact that, okay, he didn't have to create his own shot. He wasn't putting the ball on the floor. At times when he did, it didn't look the greatest. And I have to wonder, Jackson, if that's just a factor of, okay, AJ wasn't asked to do that a whole lot this year. That's not the flow of the Duke offense. And all of a sudden there's 10 seconds left on the shot clock. AJ's got the basketball and you got to find a chance. You got to find a good look. And so if he has more of a time to develop that, I think he'll be able to prove he can do that. On the defensive end of the floor, I think he's solid. I don't think he's just overly spectacular by any stretch of the imagination, but I do not see defense as his weakness. I think he's going to be a good player to draft.
AJ Griffin, a great foundation with which to build on if the Rockets were to go that route and pick him up. But coming up, we're going to shift our focus to one of the guys who could potentially going number one overall in this year's NBA draft. And that is, of course, Paolo Banchero. We're going to get there after a quick message from our friends over at Shady Rays. Shady Rays is an independent sunglasses company that gives you the features of $200 sunglasses for just a fraction of the price. That means polarized lenses, well-constructed durable frames, and premium high-end finishes. Also, something that you won't find anywhere else is Shady Rays' insane protection program. Shady Rays includes lost and broken protection on every single pair. They will send you a brand new pair if you lose them, no matter what happened. Give them a try, and if you don't absolutely love them, you'll pay next to nothing. Actually, you'll pay nothing, even better than next to nothing, right? You don't pay a dime. It's as simple as that. Plus, 10 meals are donated to fight hunger in America when you shop with Shady Rays exclusively for our listeners. Head to shadyrays.com and use code LOCKEDON to get 50% off 2 or more pairs of polarized sunglasses. That's code LOCKEDON for their best deal of the season. 50% off 2 or more pairs of Shady Rays sunglasses, backed by over 150,000 verified 5-star reviews. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, appreciate you for making Locked On Rockets your first listen each and every day. For your second listen, be sure to check out the Locked On Now podcast, nightly recaps of every single NBA game with analysis from our local experts, free and available wherever you get your podcast. Continuing on here with Duke expert JJ Jackson. Now, JJ, Paolo Banchero. He's the guy that, is at the top of a lot of people's mock drafts, big boards, all of that. For me personally, and this is even after having Rafael Barlow on the program last week, our in-house Locked On draft expert from the Locked On, NBA draft podcast, from the Big Board show, all of that. I'm still not completely sold on what Paolo brings to the table necessarily. I've actually got him the lowest on my big board of the top 4, consensus guys. I haven't quite factored Shaedon Sharpe into that mix yet. But give me your elevator pitch for Paolo Banchero, what he brings to the table, what makes him special as a player.
I think if you're looking at just the top 4 guys in particular, I think number one is the fact that he's a winning player wherever he goes, the fact that he led this Duke basketball team to the Final Four, given the stakes and the pressure that they had. The greatest college basketball coach in the history of the sport announced before the season started that I'm walking away at the end of the season. This is going to be my last ride, the last dance, so to speak, and Mike Krzyzewski. I cannot imagine the pressure that was put in place for this Duke men's basketball team with the talented freshmen that they come in. Keep in mind, last year in the COVID year, Duke did not make the NCAA tournament for the first time in 25 years. In 2020, the NCAA tournament was canceled altogether. So there's all this added pressure that at a program like Duke that is expected to compete for ACC championships and national championships at the end of the year, that's your expectation. And not to mention, every eyeball in the country is going to be watching you every single game this season because Coach K is going to be retiring at the end of the year. That's a tremendous amount of pressure. And Paolo played up to it every single game. The idea that he could put the ball on the deck and drive and attack was so exciting. His three-point shot continued to develop throughout the year. It's not where other prospects are. And I'm not going to come and spit lies and say that this guy is such a remarkable knockdown three-point shooter, but he definitely can get to that level. I truly do believe he could do it all at 6'10", 250. I mean, he's just a force out there on the floor. That's why I think you should absolutely consider taking Paolo with the first overall pick. But hey, if you're Houston, if you are closer down to that 4 or 5 spot, if you were to fall that low, I think you're going to get a great player.
I wonder too, just there are some questions that I have about, necessarily maybe similar to AJ Griffin, right? When you transition from college hoops to the NBA, the game, it just stylistically, it completely changes. And I do wonder if we didn't get a true glimpse, at what Paolo could be at the NBA level, just with the way that Duke kind of ran their offense, the guard play that you mentioned before. I kind of envision Paolo as being, this guy that maybe you give him the ball, you let him kind of orchestrate and steer the offense a bit more rather than just being, an ISO post-up guy.
Yeah, no, there was a little bit of that. Duke obviously had different offensive identities throughout the year as you're trying to always improve throughout the season, and you want to do whatever it takes to get to the end. I'll tell you this, though, when Duke got into the NCAA tournament, not many people had them picked as a Final Four team, and it was because of Paolo Banchero and then their sophomore point guard, Jeremy Roach, that really elevated their play that took Duke all the way to the end. He led all Power 5 freshmen in scoring this year. He led his own team that includes Mark Williams, who's also going to be a lottery pick, in rebounding. So he was productive on the glass on that end of the floor as well. And then just his physical build and makeup is crazy. The number of players that come out of that Seattle area and are now starring in the NBA is crazy. And Paulo's already getting shout outs since he was like in 7th grade from the Jamal Crawfords of the world, the Isaiah Thomases, the guys that are really carrying the flag for Seattle Hoopers. And he's going to be the next great one in line.
Shout out to former Seattle Hooper Kevin Porter Jr., who is a big Paolo Banchero fan as well. JJ, when you look at Paolo and just, he's got that diverse kind of offensive skill set. You mentioned the shooting, which is maybe the one area that's a bit of a, bit of a pause for concern. The numbers aren't like drastically terrible or anything. It's just, it's got to be something that he's got to continue to work on and gradually improve. But what do you think is right now his most billable skill or trait offensively that he brings to the table?
I think just his ability to, you didn't see it a whole lot, but it really did feel like, one, he never felt overwhelmed whatsoever, and that's playing for the top team in the country that has the most eyeballs night in, night out, and you know that you're going to get double teams, and he never felt overwhelmed by any of it. Offensively, he could get a shot at any point of the floor and was able to do that. Look, if we're doing comparison to comparison of the top 4 guys, and I love the NBA draft time of year because it's turned into a top 4, right? Because everyone is just blown away now by Jaden Ivey and what he did at Purdue. But in the season, Jackson, it was only Paolo and Jabari Smith and Chet Holmgren, and that was it. And credit to Jaden for entering that conversation. But if you're looking at those guys, I think you saw the most versatile game from Paolo out of those 4 guys. The guys that could put it on the deck, go to the rim and finish, guys that could step out and shoot. Jabari Smith is the better shooter when you're comparing the two, but Jabari Smith wasn't putting it on the floor and trying to attack as much as Paolo was this season. So I think that the versatility that he's got and the fact that he did not get overwhelmed, that's his greatest offensive strength.
For those who want to kind of get a glimpse, right, visually of what Paolo potentially brings to the table, what was his maybe best game of the season that you can recall? And maybe also, inversely, his worst game of the season, to be able to kind of see two sides of his performances this past year.
Yeah, worst game, the one that was most frustrating, the one that felt like Paolo was pushing just a little bit too much. And we mentioned pressure and eyeballs. I have to go to the North Carolina game, not in the Final Four, but the North Carolina game. The last game of the regular season, Coach K's final game inside Cameron Indoor Stadium. The whole internet saw it, right? You saw 100 former players that were legends at Duke and legends in the NBA watching courtside the entire final game for Coach K there in Cameron Indoor. And Paolo just forced it too much. I think he took way too many shots, a season high in attempts. Nothing was falling for him. So that would definitely be the one that if you want to get a glimpse of, okay, what does it look like when he is a little bit overwhelmed? When he is trying to do way too much, that would be the one to go to. In terms of a best, it's hard to pick one, so to speak. I would honestly say if you want the best stretch of Paolo Banchero basketball, it's to watch the first half of the Gonzaga game in November, Thanksgiving week. The game was played in Las Vegas at a neutral site. Paolo Banchero versus Chet Holmgren, both of those guys at their best. In the first half, Paolo was unbelievable, Jackson. And then in the second half, he started to cramp a little bit. And so he was removed from the basketball game. Duke, their sports science staff, was able to find out that this guy loses 7 pounds of sweat per game. Just from sweating, he loses 7 pounds. And so then his body's having to keep up. And so he's just changing the way he hydrates throughout a game day. He got that fixed. So that was never an issue for him at all the rest of the season. I don't think that's ever going to be an issue again. But if he had played that second half at full strength against Chet Holmgren, who he was absolutely dominating in that matchup, I don't even know what the numbers would have looked like if he were able to play a full game.
A lot of interesting, angles to really take apart and dissect when you consider Paolo Banchero and whether or not he goes number 1 overall. Maybe he slips a little bit, goes further down, what his potential fit looks like with the Houston Rockets. But coming up, we've got one more guy here we're going to talk about, and that's Mark Williams from Duke. We're going to get there in just a moment after a quick message from our friends over at Built Bar. Protein bars. You either love them or you hate them. And if you don't absolutely love the protein bars that you're currently eating, you need to check out Built Bar. They're the #1 protein bar on the market. Every single bar is coated in 100% delicious chocolate. They're soft. They're easy to chew. The consistency is never weird. They're not gritty or chalky like some other protein bars out there. They've got so many incredible flavors to choose from too. Raspberry, salted caramel, cookies and cream, mint brownie, my personal favorite, coconut brownie chunk. You can't go wrong with a single bar on their menu. Every single bar is low cal, low sugar, high protein, high fiber. Amazing if you're on a keto diet. Amazing if you're trying to cut back a little bit, lose a little bit of weight. You can check them out. Just go to built.com and use promo code LOCK15 to get 15% off the very next order of the best tasting protein bars on the market. Again, that's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, appreciate you for making Locked On Rockets your first listen each and every day. For your second listen, be sure to check out the Locked On NBA podcast from the first jump of the play-in tournament to the last possession and the final buzzer of the finals. Locked On experts take you deep inside the playoffs with insight and analysis affecting all 30 teams. I host the Monday show for Locked On NBA. It's always a ton of fun. Be sure to check it out wherever you get your podcasts. Now, JJ, when we shift gears here and we take a look at the center, the anchor for this Duke men's basketball team, Mark Williams, one, I think that he, depending on who you ask, I think maybe, probably third best prospect, at the 5 spot in this draft. Obviously, you got Chet Holmgren right at the top of the board. But then, maybe depending on who you talk to, Jalen Duren, who's kind of fallen off, some people's draft boards a little bit. Mark Williams' stock kind of rising as we approach the NBA draft. I have to ask you first off, is the 7'7" wingspan, can you attest to that? Is it true? Because that would apparently make him, I believe, if I remember correctly, if it is true, that would give him the fifth largest wingspan in the NBA at 7'7".
Yeah, no, it's definitely. I haven't visually been there in person to 100% verify when we're measuring a wingspan that it's 7'7", right? But Jackson, I'll tell you this much: when we get to the combine portion of the draft season, you're going to find out for sure that it is probably 7'7". I mean, it's unreal the amount of ground and just space he can cover with his arms defensively. It's so impressive to watch Mark play defense.
Yeah, and that's where I want to keep a lot of the attention here focused, because I feel like that's going to be kind of his calling card, right? Maybe you see a little bit of, for Rockets fans, maybe a little bit of Clint Capella to his game, kind of that, sizable 6'11", 7 foot tall, big man, good physical attributes across the board, good athlete. Defensively, being able to kind of anchor a team, and we'll get to the offensive side here in just a moment, but how did he fare defensively for Duke? Was he basically just the de facto anchor for this team? How heavily did they lean on him, on that side of the floor?
Yeah, no, he definitely was the anchor of this defense. You look at the numbers that he had in advanced stats is something that I don't spend a whole lot of time in, but when you hear people talk about Mark Williams, that is what jumps off the screen. Just how good he was. His block rate was just something that you've never really seen before at Duke. And Duke has had so many great defensive players over the years. He was such a force on the defensive end of the floor. He finished fourth in the entire country in blocks, which was so remarkable to be playing for a school like Duke and be able to protect the glass and the rim as much as he did. So, no, his defensive ability was top notch. And that's something that definitely NBA teams are going to love when they see him at the next level.
What is his, and this might be, again, limited sample size because of the differences in stylistic play from, NCAA to NBA, but what did his switchability look like, in the moments where if he did find himself caught on a smaller player out on the perimeter, like his ability to, move his feet, stay with guys like that? Is that an area that he could be kind of susceptible to, at the next level?
100%. I mean, I don't know how you get to be 7'1" with that big and it not sort of be susceptible, right? When you're having to switch to a much smaller and quicker player and do that so effectively, there are only just a handful of guys who truly at that large frame are able to do that. Mark did struggle a little bit with that. You mentioned the Final Four game that Duke had against North Carolina, their biggest rival. The last shot of the game that people are going to remember forever, Caleb Love, a three-pointer at the top of the key, and it came off a switch, and Mark Williams is right there trying to defend him and trying to extend and reach out his arm defensively. So that's something that could absolutely improve going into the next level. It's not remarkable, but it's something that that alone would not be a reason why I wouldn't draft Mark Williams.
Kind of changing gears here, taking a look at the offensive side of the ball for Mark Williams. How exactly did Duke really utilize him offensively in conjunction with so many of the other weapons that they had? Obviously probably a bit of a smaller role offensively than what he may be featured as at the NBA level, which is, your prototypical rim running big, a guy that can, dive into the paint, roll hard to the rim, and really probably, try to finish above the rim using his size.
Yeah, no, that's exactly the role that he had at Duke, and that's exactly the role I envision him having at the NBA level. I don't see Mark being a guy that you're going to run your offense through, but he's going to be ready to make plays when you need him to, if that makes sense. At Duke, he was 100% a lob threat every time he was on the floor. Duke would love to try and drive down and toss the lob up to him or throw the ball on the inside and have him finish at the rim. His hands are great, right? Too many times at the college basketball level, when you start to evaluate some of the bigs, you're impressed by their defensive ability. You're impressed by just the rebounding ability, maybe how big they are, but oftentimes you worry about, okay, well, can they even catch the ball? When you throw it at them 100 miles an hour, are they going to be able to catch it, or are they too big that they're goofy and clumsy and they can't make that happen? That was never an issue for Mark Williams. He was always able to catch and finish through contact, and I think you're going to see that at the next level for sure too.
Great hands are a great asset for any big to have, really at any level of play. But that's great to hear for Mark Williams. Now, I my follow up to that, JJ, is how is his passing ability, right? So if he catches the pass on like the short roll to the rim and the defense, rotates over quick enough to where he doesn't necessarily have that full lane to get to the basket to complete, a roll to the rim. How is he as that connective piece to find the next man to kick it out to the open shooter?
He did a fine job. I think with the shooters that Duke had on the floor, AJ Griffin being one of them that we talked about, there were a couple of times where Duke tries to throw it into the post and Mark's able to kick it back out, or there's another cutter coming through the rim, right? Duke loved to have Paolo have the ball at the top of the key, toss it over to Mark, and then let Paolo make a move and expect Mark to give the ball back to Paolo, right? And so I think he did a fine job passing the basketball, and I think he's going to do a great job at the next level doing that too.
With his overall game right now there's not much range to his game, if at all, right? And I think that's kind of the area of possible concern where, well, you think, do you really draft a guy who can't shoot the basketball at all, in the lottery? And I think that those same concerns can be extended over to, again, Jalen Duren as well. Shooting is always going to be maybe a bit of a red flag for some of these prospects coming out. But you look at his free throw percentage; he's shooting 73% on the year. Does that kind of lend the belief, maybe, JJ, that he could be a guy that maybe extends his range at the NBA level? Do you see any issues with his form? Is it funky at all, the mechanics behind it, or is it pretty solid?
Pretty solid. I'm really glad you brought that up, Jackson, because the one stat that always jumps out to me when evaluating the year that Mark Williams had, and Rockets fans, if you start to have conversations about the draft and you want to bring this up, mention this. Mark Williams is the only guy in America this season that shot better than 70% from the floor and 70% from the free throw line. Only one guy ever did that all season long, and that was Mark Williams. His free throw stroke, you felt confident when he was going to the line that he was going to be able to knock it down. He would take a couple of free throw line jumpers in a game. The Duke offense never had him in a position to shoot the three ball. I don't know what that looks like. I can't answer that question honestly. But the mid-range area and at the free throw line, he was fine. And when he was shooting the basketball, it wasn't like you weren't grimacing because it looked funky or anything. It looked fine.
And here's the last piece that I have here for you when it comes to Mark Williams, JJ, is how is his ability, obviously playing alongside Paolo Banchero gives you a really talented offensive individual to kind of play off of. What was his ability like, just his offensive floor awareness, being in the right spot, not crowding the court at certain times? I think that's an area that sometimes we see, especially bigs who can't necessarily space the floor all the way out to the 3-point line. Sometimes you can see an offense get kind of mucked up if guys are in the wrong spots, if they're cutting at the wrong time, if they're trying to crash the glass at an inopportune moment. Is there any of a concern with that? Did you ever see any of that, or just what's his overall offensive awareness look like?
I think that's got to be where you give Coach K and his staff credit for making sure that Duke was always in a good position and that there wasn't a whole lot of clogging in the paint and that sort of thing. Duke was, for a team that if that was a concern, you didn't see it, because Duke was a team that absolutely dominated. When you were watching a game this season, the announcers, the stat crew, they wanted to show you how many points Duke was getting in the paint. And I don't think that would have been a case if Mark Williams wasn't aware of where he was at. And if Duke, the other players, weren't aware of the fact that you could just throw it to Mark in the paint to be able to finish. So I think absolutely the fact that all three of these guys we've talked about today, Mark Williams, Paolo Banchero, and AJ Griffin, played for Coach K, should give you confidence too. This is a guy that, as a coach, won 3 Olympic gold medals, knows professional basketball really, really well. And we've seen a lot of stars in the playoffs that right now that went to Duke and played there. So I think you're making a good pick if you get a Dookie.
3 guys who are, and not to mention the other guys that are going to be a little bit further down in the draft as well. Other guys that the Rockets may have their eyes on potentially around, pick 17, all that. A lot of really talented individuals coming out in the draft. JJ, I'm going to put you on the spot here for this last question. I'm going to make you predict where you think each of these guys is going to go in the draft order. So let's start at the top of the pecking order with Paolo, then we'll go AJ, and then we'll go Mark Williams. Where do you think they get drafted in this year's draft? You don't have to give me the team, because obviously that's not quite set yet. But
I'm not prepared for that. But of those 3 guys, I think ultimately that Paolo ends up probably in that 3 spot. I do think that there's a good chance both Chet and Jabari Smith will be drafted before him. I'm going to lock in Paolo at 3. AJ, let's lock him in at 8. I do think he's a top 10 pick, and I think somebody's going to fall in love with him. And then I'm going to put Mark Williams at 14. I'm going to put him the last pick of the lottery, but I do think he hears his name called. So, again, don't know the teams, haven't looked as much into that, but that's kind of what I'm hearing, what I'm thinking. And I'd love for Duke to be able to say that in Coach K's last year, they had 3 more lottery picks added to the bunch. He's got the most all time, so why not add plenty more to it? So, and if some are playing for the Rockets, I'm going to be just as thrilled. Look, Jackson, we've only had Austin Rivers over the past few years that have played for the Rockets, right? And of course, the great Shane Battier played for so many years for Houston, but that was forever ago. It's time to bring a Duke Blue Devil back to H-Town.
Shout out to, Rockets fan favorite and all-time great Shane Battier, as well as Austin Rivers, whose nickname we co-opted here in Houston. We nicknamed him, instead of Austin Rivers, we flipped it to Houston Bayous. That's what we called him when he was down here. But JJ, an absolute pleasure to have you on the program. Do me a favor. Rockets fans everywhere should be checking out all the amazing collegiate level podcasts we have on the Locked On Network, especially with where the team finds themselves right now to be able to prepare for and kind of scout ahead of the draft and all that. Let everybody know where they can track you down at.
Yeah, for sure. I'm on Twitter at _JJ_Jackson_ and Locked On Blue Devils, much like Locked On Rockets, is available everywhere. I mean, absolutely everywhere. You can watch it every day on YouTube and listen to it wherever you get your podcasts. Your source for all things Duke athletics.
Thanks a million, JJ. A pleasure talking hoops with you.
Jackson, I had a whole lot of fun. We'll do it again soon.
That's going to do it for today's episode covering the 3 prospects of most interest to the Houston Rockets out of Duke this season: AJ Griffin, Paolo Banchero, and Mark Williams. How do you feel about those 3 prospects for the Houston Rockets? Let me know in the YouTube comments. But as always, appreciate you for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, consider subscribing wherever you get your podcasts: Apple, Spotify, Google, the Odyssey app, free and available wherever you listen to your podcast. I mentioned the YouTube channel. Go there, search Locked On Rockets on YouTube, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.